Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brandon Carter. I'm an application engineer with Ally PLM Solutions. I want to welcome you to the Ally PLM NX Lunch Bytes series. For those of you not familiar with Lunch Bytes is a series to briefly explore capabilities within NX that are often overlooked. Please check our website for upcoming Lunch Bytes topics and dates. I know we're approaching the end of the year, so you'll have to check out some topics for next year. Some of those topics will be on NX9. If you have any questions regarding today's session, please write them down and send them in an email. I'd appreciate that. There's several of you on the line today, so you'll be in listen-only mode. Today's topic is kind of a general tips and tricks session. We thought this might be kind of a fun one to end the year on. Some of you may already know some of these tips, but hopefully you'll walk away learning something new that'll help you be more productive. As always, those of you that have joined my Lunch Bytes before, I will more than likely run over 30 minutes, a little after 1. I talk too much, and so if you've been with me before, you've probably seen that. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. And I have more slides than I normally do because I wanted to list these topics out for you. We will do some demonstration inside NX. I am running NX9 today. If you guys see it and it looks different, that could be why. For just a rough agenda, we're going to look at these different areas, some tips and tricks in each one of these. So, for example, things like user interface tips and tricks, things with view tools, the sketcher, modeling, assemblies, drafting, and then some general information at the end. So let's start with user interface. And like I said, I have a few more slides than I typically do in Lunch Bytes, but it's kind of to list these out. And remember, if I go through these kind of quick, we do record these, and this replay will be up on our website. So did you know that Command Finder can not only help you find the location of an NX command, but also, number one, if you're new to NX, it'll help you find the NX equivalent command compared to the CAD system you're coming from. So for example, if you've ran AutoCAD in the past, and you know that to pattern something in AutoCAD it was called array. So if you type in array inside of Command Finder, it'll help you find what the equivalent would be in NX, which is pattern. The other thing is if you can't find the command, but because of a role, maybe it's not displayed, even if that command is hidden because of a role, you can run Command Finder and it'll show you the results of where it is, and then you can run the command from Command Finder. And the reason why I wanted to remind everybody of Command Finder is when you do run NX9, you will notice the new user interface, and Command Finder can help you start getting used to the new NX9 user interface and start being productive off the bat. So here I've typed in array, Command Finder comes up, and you see all the different pattern type commands inside of NX. That would be our equivalent. Did you know, or I should say, do you know, where the pull-down menus and application menus are in NX9? So I have a little screenshot there on the upper right, but the pull-down menus are underneath this menu button. And then you'll see the file, edit, view, insert, your typical pull-down menu from there. Also, excuse me, underneath the File tab, you can find application menus to go into different environments. So drafting, simulation, Shape Studio, modeling, etc. You'll see there underneath the File tab. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on specifically what's new with the user interface in NX9. We're going to look at that in Lunch Bytes beginning next year. So look for what's new in NX9 Lunch Bytes for both CAD and CAM. Did you know that you can change the new NX9 user interface back to the layout of 8.5? You can do this in Customer Defaults or Preferences. So inside of Customer Defaults, you can go to User Interface underneath Gateway and click on the Layout tab, and you'll see for User Interface Environment, you can do User Preference, or you can switch it to do Ribbon Bar Only, which is the new NX9 style, Classic Toolbars Only, which is the 8.5 and older style. So keep in mind, I do want to make sure everyone's aware of this. You have the ability to switch back for a release or two, and I can't remember exactly which release, but no more than 2 releases, and this option will go away, and you will be using the new ribbon bar technique or layout that you see in NX9. So, excuse me. Did you know that you can click the middle mouse button to move forward in a command? So here I just have the 8.5, what was new in 8.5 geometric constraints window. If I've selected geometry and it doesn't automatically move down to the next selection step, I can hit the middle mouse button and it'll go on to the next selection step or the next step. See how it's now highlighted in orange? Also, the other thing middle mouse button does is whatever is highlighted in green in a dialog, whether it's OK, apply, cancel, or close, hitting the middle mouse button will do that action. So this will help you minimize mouse travel back to the, left or wherever your dialog is docked. Did you know that you can use radial menus to minimize mouse travel while we're on that subject? You can hold down the right mouse button out in the graphics window and get a specific radial button. You can hold down the right mouse button on geometry or a feature or a face or a curve or whatever and get a specific radial button. There's also 3 that can be customized, so Control-Shift with left mouse button, Control-Shift with middle mouse button, and Control-Shift with right mouse button. All 3 of those can be customized any way you want. Did you know that you can run a full screen mode inside of NX? What we're going to look at here is how the toolbars are hidden and how we can interact, and then also how we could use radial buttons with full screen mode. So let's go ahead and switch over to NX and look at a few of these ideas. Like I said, I am running NX9, and the first couple things we want to look at is the command finder. So command finder has been pulled out. If I type in array like I mentioned on the slide, not only is it going to show me where these particular commands are, but if you're new to NX and for example you come from AutoCAD, you can type in array and see the different NX equivalent commands. So what would it be in NX? Pattern face, you'll see that I can also launch pattern face if I'm using a synchronous tool. Or if I want to do pattern feature, I can launch it from command finder. I'm pointing this out with NX9, but Command Finder is available in previous versions. So keep that in mind, especially if you're new to NX. Actually, let me do one more. I come from another CAD system where thin wall is a shell operation. So you'll see all the different shell operations, and as I hover over top of them, you'll see it shows me where they are located in the toolbars, pull-down menus, and so forth. And like I said, that can be launched from Command Finder. Excuse me. I mentioned, just a mentionable item. If you are launching NX9 for the first time and you're trying to figure out where your pull-down menus are, you see that your familiar insert menu is underneath this menu drop-down. If I go into customer defaults and look at underneath gateway, user interface, this was the option I was talking about being able to switch back to classic toolbars. This user preference allows the user to pick inside of preferences, user interface, which style layout they want. Ribbon bar only or classic toolbars only. If this is selected in customer defaults as a global option, then you do not have the option in preferences. And what I mean by that is inside of preferences, user interface, on the layout tab, you'll see the user interface environment, either ribbon or classic. Classic would be the 8.5 layout, like we're used to, and then ribbon bar would be the new tabs, the new ribbon bar layout. So you can switch, but keep in mind, only for a release or two. All right, that will go away, and you will be using the tabs. I haven't talked about it, but everything in the tabs is customizable, and we will talk about that in future Lunch Bytes next year. The middle mouse button advancing, you'll see that in action later. Radio buttons. If I hold down on my right mouse button, I'm holding down on it, you'll see that here I'm out in the graphics space, and I can interact with some of these tools. So for example, I can make this shaded with edges. I could hold it down and go over to 9 o'clock and let off and make it wireframe. I come down to the fit command. So I'm holding down my right mouse button out in space and interacting with some of those tools. So it's minimizing mouse travel and makes it very easy and very quick to go through those options. There I was out in space. If I hold down my right mouse button over top of a feature, see how I get things like edit with rollback. I could roll back the model and change that extrude feature. If I picked a specific face, hold down my right mouse button, you'll see that I can do things like edit display, and paint that face, change the color, but I'm doing it at my cursor location. Another mentionable item, you'll see there's a floating toolbar. This was new with 8.5, so depending on what I click on, I get a different floating toolbar, and that's just by selecting. The radio button is by holding down the right mouse button and interacting with the command. If I hold down Control-Shift left mouse button, you'll see a set of commands. That's radio button 1. Control-Shift middle mouse button, that's another set I can customize, and Control-Shift right mouse button. By default, these are synchronous tools, but any of those 3 radio buttons with Control-Shift can be customized. So with that being said, there's also a full screen mode, so I can go ahead and enter full screen mode. You see down here on the bottom right. And with NX9, you see how the tabs across the top of the command ribbon is minimized. So if I click that, you see that I could go into a command and it would minimize the command ribbon. This is how we work with full screen mode. In NX 8.5, you would actually get this toolbar down at the bottom that can be transparent, and all your tools that are minimized for this full screen mode would be in this toolbar. The nice thing is, if you do decide to run some full screen mode like I have shown here, if you get lost a little bit, it's just a toggle switch to go back into the normal mode. If I go back into full screen mode, I could use my radio button. If I come up here and drop a hole somewhere, I can use my radio button to find the checkered flag to finish the sketch. I can preview my hole, and notice over on the left, the command bar, how OK is the green action. So if I hit my middle mouse button, you'll see that it hit OK. So if I go through that at full speed, I go ahead and drop the hole, close the checkered flag, hit the middle mouse button, you see that we've hit OK. And I just took the defaults in the hole. So that's what full screen mode looks like. Let me go ahead and toggle back out of there. Let's go ahead and move on to some view tools. And first of all, I listed some of these keyboard shortcuts underneath view. Obviously, they're in different areas, but things like hide and show and hide I wanted to list, so I just listed other keyboard shortcuts. These are a list of keyboard shortcuts that I use. So there are some handy keyboard shortcuts, things like Control-B for hide, Control-W for show and hide, Control-L for layer settings, Control-E for expressions, and I have a screenshot of each one of these dialogues, and X for extrude. Obviously there's others. Remember that you can customize these or go into the customize environment to find out more of these. These are usually displayed inside of tooltips, what the keyboard shortcut is, as well as you hover over top of a command or find it in a pull-down menu. The many others, simple things like Control-C for copy, Control-V for paste, and items like that. So keep those in mind. Did you know that you can set your rotation point? There's 2 ways to set your rotation point. If I right-click out in space, you'll see that I can set the rotation reference. I can also clear the rotation reference. That would allow me to pick an exact key point. Also, I can just hold down the middle mouse button a little longer before I start moving my cursor to rotate, and it will infer the area where my cursor is. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. This is a very simple one, but I use this all the time, especially if I'm using direct sketch approach to sketching inside of NX. You'll see that you can rotate your model kind of close to a normal view and hit F8, and it'll square up to that base datum view. You can rotate your model, like I said, close. So if I go to a right view, it'll square up to the right view. If I go to the top and hit F8, it'll square up to the top view. And I use F8 all the time. So I'll show you that in action here in a minute. Did you know that you can use Fit View to Selection to zoom up on small parts or features? So in this example, I have this large assembly where I'm wanting to focus on a headlight. So I can pick the headlight graphically or from the assembly navigator and click Fit View to Selection, and just like it sounds, whatever my selection is, it's going to perform a fit on that. Also, maybe you have a small hole in a component model, right? Then I can select that small hole and do a fit and quickly zoom up about that geometry. Did you know that you can use these clip sections to display the internal areas of both models and assemblies? So on the View tab, there's a couple commands called Clip Section and Edit Section. Edit section creates the dynamic section and has all the options for whether you want it to display kind of in the X, Y, YZ, and so forth. And you can also pick whether it's one plane or two planes. And then clip section is a toggle switch to toggle that on and off. So there you see I have the entire tractor assembly section so I can see the internal workings. And like I said, this is both on an assembly or a component file. Did you know that you can refresh your display if you have a problem with your graphics? Sometimes you may have hardware, graphics card, etc. that may not be really powerful, and you'll see some artifacting or some little glitches around the sides every once in a while. Like I said, especially depending on your hardware. And if you right-click and go to refresh or hit F5, sometimes that'll take care of it. If for some reason that does not take care of it, there's also a tool called Regenerate All Work Views, or I'm sorry, Regenerate All Views. In 8.5 and older, it was called Regenerate Work, and that would do a deeper refresh of the graphics, the view. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these options. The first thing we want to do, I'm not going to talk about the keyboard shortcuts we saw on the slide, but the F8. If I rotate this close to a top view, and I hit F8 on the keyboard, see how it'll snap close to that top view. If I'm closer over here to a right view and I hit F8, see how it'll snap. If I'm closer to a front view, hit F8, see how it'll snap. If I'm underneath the model, hit F8, you see how it snaps closest to that normal view. So that's a very handy shortcut that I use a lot. As far as setting the rotation point, if I right-click out in space and say set rotation reference, this allows me to click a specific key point, then hold down my middle mouse button or use a rotate command to rotate about that point. If I want to clear the rotation point, then you see we're back to the center of the graphics geometry. If I hold down my middle mouse button and keep holding it, see how it'll infer a point where that point's out in space or near the model. See, if I did it quick, it didn't infer that point. See how it's about the center of the model? Whereas here, if I hold it down a little longer, then it'll rotate about that point you see on the screen. So there I'm just holding down the middle mouse button, or like I said, you do have options to get specific and set and clear rotation reference for rotating there. The next thing we want to take a look at, and we'll see some action later, like I said, with the middle mouse button. Let's go ahead and switch over to a larger assembly. And this assembly, I've used this assembly before in a large assembly performance lunch Bytes, so it may be familiar to you. What we're going to look at here is the clipping section and also doing the fit to selection. So whether I pick the part graphically, like you saw on the slide, or if I come in here and drill down into my navigator, and maybe I grab both those headlights. Right now, obviously, it's fit to the screen. If I come up to view and do fit view to selection, it'll fit whatever's in my select set to the screen. So I use that all the time. I think that's very, very handy. If I do a normal fit, right, to fit it all back, let's take a look at the clipping sections while we're here in this view tab. So the first thing I'm going to do is edit the section. And I just want you to be aware of this. We're not going to talk about all the options, but you'll see that I can take this triad, I can flip directions and how it's dynamically sectioned the model. In this case, is this large assembly. I can change my orientation, maybe set it to Y, see how it's sectioned the model in this direction. I can dynamically pull the handles and change dynamically the section so I can slice through the model. I can change it instead of one plane to two parallel planes. So there I have one set up in the front. Then I can go ahead and dynamically section the back one up into the wheels. And I've set up my section there. Go ahead and hit OK. And you see that it turns off the display. So now I'm only working between these two section planes. And this clip section up here is just a toggle to toggle on and off that edit section that we just created. If I need to make a change to that, I go back into the edit section and leave off where I was at, and then maybe I want to pull this back plane in a little farther, closer to the center of that. So like I said, you set up the section and then you'd say whether you want to display it or not. So it's very handy looking at internal workings of a model, or even in this case, an assembly. Alright, what else here? So we looked at the rotation reference, we looked at the fit view to selection, we looked at the clip sections. Alright, looks good. So let's go ahead and move on to sketching. And a few things I pulled out from sketching that I use all the time. Did you know that you can draw a tangent arc from a line and profile command? So you can click a line, and I'm using profile. You could, one, come up here and click on the arc option and it'd pull a tangent arc off. Or there's a shortcut method where you can click and hold your left mouse button down and it'll actually go into that tangent arc. So we'll see how that looks in a minute. While we're on the subject of lines, the arcs, maybe we're creating different slots, did you know that you can draw a slot shape using the fillet command? What you're going to do is draw a rectangle and create a fillet between these two horizontal lines, and you'll see there's an option called delete third curve, and I can also do an alternate fillet which would switch the orientation. Did you know that you can draw polygons without drawing each segment and constraining it all? There's a polygon command in the sketch environment in the Sketcher tool. So basically, instead of drawing that 8-sided shape down there and constraining all that, I can go straight to polygon, say how many sides I want, define a size, and it'll dimension and take care of that for me. So if you do different shapes like that, make sure you take advantage of that command. So let's take a look at a couple ideas here. Come back over here to a component, and just to look at these different shortcuts for tangent arcs and so forth, I'm going to come up here and just create a sketch. So inside the profile command, if I just start drawing the horizontal line, you'll see that I could come up here and use mouse travel, come over here and click on the arc, and it would go into the tangent arc. Now if you're not familiar with tangent arc, before we look at the real shortcut, I want to show you that these are little intent zones. So whether I bring my cursor up through 12 o'clock, see how the arc will come off in this direction or this direction. If I bring my cursor through 9 o'clock, see how it'll come off this direction or this direction. If I bring it down through 12 o'clock, see how it'll come off this direction or this direction. If I bring my cursor through 3 o'clock, that's the result I want. So I can pull that arc through, go ahead and click, and it'll define or switch back to my line. Unclick, and then I could come up to the arc option and have that come back around tangent to the original start point. Now the shortcut to that, so I don't have to come up here and click on the arc option, not that that's a big deal, but a little bit of mouse travel. If I go ahead and draw a horizontal line, then hold down my left mouse button and drag and then let off, see how it switched to the arc option, and then come back to my horizontal line, hold down and drag with the left mouse button, and then I can continue that around and finish the arc. So there's a little click and hold method, a drag method to switch that over to tangent arc. If I come up here and create a rectangle, I can come up here to the fillet command, and I'm going to make sure that delete third curve is cleared, which it is out of the default. I'm going to grab these two lines and see how it's going to build a radius in between those two lines. I can have it infer tangency and see how it keeps this third segment, the vertical line there. If I turn on the delete third curve and do the same two lines, first of all, notice I have the same orientation, so I could come up here and click on alternate fillet, see how it flips direction. I have it go ahead and infer tangency here, and with the delete third curve, see how it deletes that third line. So a couple different ways if you create a lot of slots to create those very quickly. And finally, just to mention it again from the slide, there's the polygon command. How many sides do I want? There's my orientation. I can go ahead and fully constrain that and create that geometry. If I need these shapes, I could come up here and quickly extrude them. And if they're all cut through, I can extrude them and create their shapes. So we'll talk some tips and tricks with modeling here in a minute. So just a few things about Sketcher that I use a lot. So let's go ahead and move on to modeling. Did you know that you can use a region selection when adding or removing material, specifically in tools like extrude and pull face if you use some of the synchronous tools? What this is, any closed boundary will behave as a region to, like I said, push, pull, extrude. And what we're looking at is this filter called region boundary curves. and you'll see how we can push and pull these regions to add and remove material. Did you know that we can use the inferred option to create all the different types of datum planes? I love the inferred option inside of datum plane creation, and I'll show you how to create what I have on the screen very quickly. Did you know that you can use the snap to object selection to select a key point when you're extruding or using a move face or anything really that has a vector direction? On the vector, just right click the end and say snap to object, and then you're able to pick up key points. Like here I'm extruding up to the center point of that original boss. Did you know that you can use key points to snap to hole locations? This is probably pretty obvious. I just threw this in here because I think it's really cool. If I need to drop holes on the center of a boss or the center of another cylindrical shape, I can just come through, go to my hole command, set my parameters, and drop them on the center points or any key point as far as that goes. And another thing here for modeling that I think is very handy is you know that you can chain between for a large selection. So if I needed to sweep something along a lot of edges or round something along a lot of edges, I can use this chain between, which is underneath this blue arrow. This example here, you see that I'm sweeping this profile around kind of half the model, so to speak. Well, instead of doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clicks to pick those separately, I can do it with 2. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot. That's only a difference of 3 clicks, but imagine this on a larger scale, right? Instead of picking 20 clicks, right, I can do it with 2. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these items. So here's the example you saw on the slides. This is my very generic battery or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to come up here and suppress this extrude for a minute. So if I go into extrude, you'll see that there's a filter for region boundaries. So region boundaries are very slick. Any closed geometry, you see here how the entire center of the circle highlights. I can click each of those circles and extrude those. I'm going to hold down shift and deselect them. Notice how I could also pick this region. See how it's leaving these circles alone? So I could actually pick that region and extrude and either add or remove material. If I pull my cursor down, then obviously it's going to remove material. So you can use these closed boundaries to pick and push and pull material. I'm just going to hit undo on that. I could extrude this over here, but if you use some of the synchronous tools, you'll see that I could do a pull face. I grab this region and either pull or push it to add or remove material. If I hit cancel on that, I could also do something like this where I grab the outside region and leave that, and I could pull that out another inch and create that shape. Okay. So what this is doing, you could do some of this before, before this region filter came along a few releases ago, but you'd have to divide the face. So I'd have to create the sketch, and I'd have to come in and do a divide face. But with this region boundary curves, I can pick these regions and extrude them. Let me go ahead and edit into this original extrude. Let me deselect this one. So right now I have one boss. If I hit extrude and I come in here with the same region and I pick that region, well, right now my default was 1 inch. Well, maybe I don't know how tall that boss is. What you can do is I can right click and say snap to object and come over here and pick key points. Here I can pick up the center point of that, and it's going to extrude in that direction out to that key point. So take advantage of the snap to object. It's very, very handy. While we're talking about key points, if I come up here and add a hole, notice my key point snaps, and like I said, you've probably used this if you use the hole command, but I think it's very important to notice that you can do the key points. You're not always sketching. I mean, obviously, there's times you will have to sketch a point, but if there's already a key point, just go ahead and snap to that center or whatever point it is. Over here, I have this rectangle. I could come up here and snap holes to these endpoints. Obviously, that's tied to a sketch. So if I edit that sketch, you'll see that those hole locations are going to move out. They're associated to those points. So, like I said, you're probably aware of that, but I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and understand that you can snap the different key points, which I think is very, very slick. All right, so we looked at the regions. Now the next thing we want to take a look at is this infer option inside a datum plane. So when we look at the datum plane command, there are several types of planes we can create. Things that like at distance, at angle, bisector, curves and points, tangent, and so forth. What I'm going to do is create all those different types, or most of those different types, using this inferred option. So I'm going to come over here and grab this face. Obviously, it's wanting to default to an offset plane, so I could go ahead and type in 2 inches or whatever I wanted that plane to be, and you'll see that I have an offset plane. If I come over here and grab this face, well, it's still inferring an offset plane, and I just typed in 2 inches, so it says, hey, do you want to do 2 inches again? But notice if I continue clicking and I click this edge, then it infers an angle plane, or an at angle plane. So I can type in 30 degrees. Apply is green, so I hit middle mouse button to accept that. If I come over here and grab this face and this face, hit apply, there's a bisector plane. If I grab this face and this face, there's a bisector plane. And notice I'm doing it all with the inferred option. If I come up here and grab this cylindrical face, it throws up a tangent plane. If I continue clicking to this cylindrical face, see how that plane is tangent to both bosses, both cylindrical faces. And underneath plane orientation, there's an alternate solution. So I can toggle it, see how that's a solution. It's tangent on that side to both cylindrical faces. I can click that, see how that's a solution. It's tangent kind of diagonal in that direction. If I click it one more time, it's tangent in that direction. So that's pretty slick. So what I did is I went in the datum plane, and instead of picking tangent and bisector and at angle and at distance, I just used the inferred option, which inferred each of those planes. The nice thing is, if I come back here to this bisector plane and I double click to edit, see how it truly is a bisector plane. The inferred option is creating those types of planes. So I recommend you take advantage of the inferred option, especially inside of datum planes. And you see inferred a lot in NX, where it's inferring a Boolean, inferring the datum planes, inferring directions, and so forth. The final thing, if I switch back over here to my original part, and here I have a sketch. Let's just say I want to sweep this sketch around here. So I'm going to come up to Insert, Sweep, Sweep Along Guide. And I have Connected Curves. Well, Connected Curves picks up the sketch very nice. But if you've done Sweep Along Guide, you'll notice that I have Connected Curves. But if I pick this edge, it doesn't pick up the connected edges. Right? I would have to come around here and click each of these edges, which for 5 is not a problem, but if there was 25, then that would take a little longer. So what we're going to do is show you the chain between, and I think the chain between is very, very slick. So if I come in here and go back into my command, my sweep along guide, I'm going to pick up the profile. Then I'm going to come up here to this blue More button, turn on chain between, and if I click this edge towards the back, and click this edge towards the back, it's going to say chain between those two edges in that direction. So there we have completed that without doing click, 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 click all the way around. Same thing here with edge blend. I could pick this bottom face, but it would also do the holes. So I want to do connected curves with chain between, and if I grab back towards this edge and closer to this edge, it'll chain between where I click on those edges. So very, very handy tool, and that was underneath the blue arrow called More, and like I said, it's called Chain Between. It's already 5 after 1. I understand if anybody needs to drop off. It's a busy time of year trying to get everything completed. The replay will be up on our website, if not tomorrow, but early next week. So let's go ahead and proceed on to assemblies. And first of all, did you know that you can drag components in from a Windows folder or the history palette or the history tab rather than using add component? What it'll do is you pull it in and add it to the assembly, it will default to applying assembly constraints. Did you know that you can click apply in between each assembly constraint as you create them? So as you're doing assembly constraints, if you can answer yes to this question, or think about this, if you find yourself clicking cancel in the assembly constraints, and any of them that you have already clicked you lose, it'll give you a message about unapplied changes. Maybe you should try clicking apply in between each constraint. You can interact with the assembly constraints dialog, as the entire session or however you want to interact, however you hit apply or OK, and so forth. But if you find yourself losing those constraints, you might want to hit apply. And I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about there in a minute. Did you know that you can move parts in any under-constrained direction while the assembly constraints command is active? All you do is click and drag with your left mouse button, and you'll see how it'll rotate in any degrees of freedom for the part. Did you know that you can determine the degrees of freedom with respect to the assembly constraints? On the Assemblies tab, you can click on a command called Show Degrees of Freedom, and it'll graphically show how that part is free to move. To get rid of that those arrows in this case, go ahead and click Refresh or F5 to dismiss those arrows. Refresh the graphics. Did you know that you can find assembly constraints relative to a single part? You can use the detail view down in dependencies, and as you click on each part, it'll show you the assembly constraints relative to that part. Did you know that you can turn on the scatter option inside the add component dialog? This would allow you to bring in multiple parts, so I can pick whatever, 2, 4, 6 parts, however many, and turn on the scatter option, and when you bring them in, they won't sit on top of each other. They'll actually automatically scatter out on your screen. Then you can apply assembly constraints in any order that you want to. Did you know that you can find the part count in the Assembly Navigator? All you do is turn on the column in that Assembly Navigator by right-clicking, going to columns, and turn it on count. Alright, so let me come back over here to an assembly. This is actually an assembly I use a lot in training class. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this pen that's already in there. And first of all, excuse me. First of all, if I come over here to my history palette, my history tab, I can come over here and drag in pen from that recent document list instead of using add component. Then obviously I could apply my assembly constraints or move or whatever action I'm going to do there, but it brings it in. If I hit undo to get rid of that pen again, I can actually browse to the Windows folder and pull in the pen from here, and same thing, right? I'll go right into assembly constraints. I can go ahead and apply the assembly constraints I want. So a couple methods to pull parts into the assembly. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this part for a second, and let's talk about what I mean by hitting apply in between each constraint. So if I pull in this S-plate part and I apply my assembly constraints, first of all, if I grab face-to-face using touch, notice I am not hitting OK or apply. So I went face-to-face. Now I'm going to go center line to center line, and then I'm going to go center line on the other hole of the plate. And I need the center line of the block, but maybe I screw up and pick that face. So obviously it's trying to flip it around, and that's not what I want. Well, you can hold down Shift and deselect what I picked wrong, but let's say I panic and hit cancel. Well, it's trying to warn me. It says, hey, you have unapplied changes. Do you really want to cancel? Well, I'm a very click-happy person, so you may say yes. We'll see how I got rid of all the constraints, and all that was a continuous workflow, right? I brought in a part, I applied 2 of 3 constraints. Well, because I hit cancel, I lost everything for that session. Which, if you want to run that entire session, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I mean by clicking apply in between is if I pull in that part and I grab this face to this face and I hit apply, then I grab this center line to this center line and I hit apply, and then I grab this center line and I pick the wrong face again. Well, if I do panic and hit cancel and I hit yes to unapplied changes, the only thing that's unapplied is that last constraint. So it's going to drop the part, and I still have the touch and I still have the alignment with the center lines, I just don't have the other alignment. So we're going to add that in a second. The other thing I mentioned on the slides is that I can go to assembly constraints, and while assembly constraints is active, I can hold down my left mouse button and actually move the part in the assembly constraints are obviously solving and showing my degrees of freedom. See how it's able to rotate about that near hole. While we're talking about that, is if I come up here underneath Assemblies and do a show degrees of freedom on that part, it says I have one rotational degree of freedom, and it shows me the way it can rotate. Now to get rid of this graphics display, what you're going to do is hit refresh or F5. So if I go ahead and add that other assembly constraint, and I do the center line and the plate to the center line and the block, then I run show degrees of freedom on that part, it'll say there are no degrees of freedom. And not that this is a tip or trick, but just so everybody knows, there's a position column in the Assembly Navigator, and it shows if your parts are fully constrained, partially constrained, or completely under constrained. This block is fixed, so it's grounded. Both the S plates, those vertical plates, are fully constrained with the solid dot, and the pin is partially constrained, which means there's at least one constraint with it. And I just dropped this in concentric, which defined height in the coaxial constraint, but it's still free to rotate, so it's not fully defined. So between show degrees of freedom, moving the part inside of assembly constraints, and looking at your position column, you can see if your parts are fully defined. Now, as far as finding your assembly constraints, back at NX 8, I believe, they added this constraint navigator, so you can see all the constraints, you can see what parts there are, and you can see the parts in there. Back on your assembly navigator, you have this constraints group where all they're listed. What I like to do is grab a part. I like to look at them by part. So if I grab this S plate and come on here underneath dependencies and branch that up and turn on this detail view, you see that S plate is selected. I see the constraints associated with that S plate. If I click on CAD, I see all the constraints associated with CAD. I click on pin, I see the constraints listed at pin. So I like looking at my constraints inside of dependencies. If I go back to S plate, I can come up here and find that touch. Maybe I want to convert it to distance. Right now it's a distance constraint, which I can edit. So then I could offset that. So the point is, underneath dependencies and turning on detail view, I can list the constraints based on what part I've selected. Excuse me. So we looked at pulling parts in from the history tab in the Windows folder. We looked at how to hit apply in between each constraint. We looked at showing degrees of freedom and how to move. We looked at the constraints and the dependencies. The final thing we want to look at is that scatter option. So if I go ahead and get rid of all the parts and I go into add component, I can grab multiple parts. So I'm going to grab the block, the pin, and the plate. And as it brings it in, I can do the scatter option. Maybe I want them to be at the absolute origin. Well, think about it. If I put them all at the absolute origin, depending on how they're modeled, they probably sit right on top of each other. But notice the scatter option. We'll go ahead and scatter those out. And then they're in the assembly now. I could go ahead and constrain them any way I want. If I want to fix the block, if I want to do the touch and align here. All right, so if we come in here and grab center line, center line, center line, the center line, and then finally I could do my concentric again down in the counterboard hole. So I could scatter them out, and it's almost like you laid the parts out on your desk and you started putting them together. All right, drafting, I got a couple things here. We're running way over on time, I apologize. Did you know that you can go through tutorials in the drafting environment? In the web browser, the tab, you can look for drafting tutorials. There are items like specify my drafting standard, the drafting user interface, and then there are specific tutorials at the bottom. Did you know that you can create a leader on a note by just holding down your left mouse button and dragging? So let me show you a couple of those. I'm going to go ahead and window over to a drawing. I'm going to switch over to drafting. Click the wrong thing. To drafting. There we go. And if I come over here to the web browser, and I've changed my path, but underneath the web browser, when you first go into there, let's see if I can get that to come back up since I I changed my part there. So I'm going to go ahead and open that drawing back up. And yeah, I've already done it. But when you first go in there, you'll see tutorials, and those buttons that you see at the bottom, if I go back a couple slides, if I click this first button down here, that's a specific tutorial. It's going to launch the model that you need, and it's going to bring up this create a drawing or whatever the tutorial, so you can follow along the text and the steps and follow along with the part that it's launched for you. So it's very helpful, especially for new users. The leader thing I'm talking about is if I come up here to the note, first of all, you may be aware if you use this before here. First of all, I got my my common note. I probably can't read that. You know, grind to fit, hammer to assemble, paint the cover. You know, that's the note that I have to put out on my work out in my garage at home. Anyway, there's my bad joke for today. But you'll see that if I hover that note, how it associates it to the view. So I just click. So if I pull that view around, the note's going to track with it. If I go back into the note, I can create a leader. So I can come over here and manually click select terminating object. So if I grab a key point, it'll pull off a leader. The shortcut I'm talking about, instead of coming over here and click select terminating object, if you just find your key point and hold your left mouse button down and drag a little bit, it'll go ahead and attach a leader to that point, and then you can click to place. So once again, I'm just trying to show you ways of minimizing some mouse travel. A couple other things to wrap up, some general information that I think is very valuable. Did you know that you can find out your part history? So whatever part I have open, or I could select a part, if you go to information, part history, it'll bring up an information text window. It'll show you what version it was created on. Everything down below here is just some template information, but you'll see here at 18, this was the first place that there was a version and a user. So I actually created this part on November 29th, 2011 at 9 o'clock in the morning on a 64-bit machine. There's my username, and it shows me what version I created in. So I created that in NX 7.5. Maintenance release 4, we'll talk about that on the next slide, but that third, number 4, there, that third digit where the 4 is, that's a maintenance release. And you'll see that I've done a couple saves, and then the version I've loaded right now is 9.0. So you can see who's saved the part, who's been working on the part, what version it was created in, and the dates for that. So that was underneath information, part history. The final thing we want to look at, did you know that you can find out what NX version, maintenance release, and maintenance pack you're running on your machine? Why this is valuable is, one, just to kind of generally know what version and maintenance release, but if you call for support and somebody here at Ally asks you, or somebody at your support avenue asks you, this will be how you can answer them. So if you go to help about NX, first of all, you see it does have the number here, 9.0.0.19. If I click on system information, I get a lot more information, but on NX version, it says NX 9.0.0.19. What this means is I'm running NX 9.0. The third digit is set to 0, so that means I do not have any maintenance releases installed yet. If I go back a slide, as I said earlier, 7.5.4, that means we're running NX 7.5 and maintenance release 4. So that's how we can tell that information. If I load maintenance release, whenever it's gonna come out soon, I think. Whenever I load maintenance release 1, you'll see that my number will change from NX 9.0.1.19 or whatever build. But the third digit is your maintenance release. If you have a maintenance pack for a maintenance release installed, it'll show you underneath NX patch if you have one loaded. I do not. This is where you can find your sold to number. I have mine covered up, and your company name, and basically information about your machine. Any bundles you may be using, you know, if you have a Mach 1 or Mach 2, whichever bundle you're actually currently using, you can see this here in the help about NX and on system information. So with that, as always, our replays can be found on our website, www.allyplm.com. You go underneath lunch bites there, as you see on the top screenshot. Our upcoming lunch bites, like I said, check back next year when we're going to do what's new in NX9 for both CAD and CAM. You can suggest a topic from here, and here's where you can also find the replays. Upcoming training here at Ally PLM, our Essentials for NX Designers, our Fundamentals class for CAD, our NX CAM Fundamentals, NX CAM Turning Fundamentals, and remember all of our classes can be taught online. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. There's my contact information and Ally's contact information. Thanks for your attention this afternoon. Hope you found this session informative, took away a couple of little tips that maybe will make you a little more productive. Please email us suggestions for future lunch bite topics, or like I showed you, you can request them on our website. Any questions you had during today's session, just email those to me as well. I appreciate your time and have a great holiday season, and we'll see you next year.